Hi, and welcome to the Mediatwits number 148. I'm Mark Glazer, Executive Editor of PBS Media Shift. Today we'll be talking about Twitter, its latest earnings, showing a little bit of a rebound for its business. But is Twitter really referring traffic to journalist sites and to articles, or is it really just holding all of the traffic on the service? We'll talk about Twitter use for journalists and Twitter's business and prospects on this episode of the Mediatwits. First, we want to a word from our sponsor. Running your own business requires focus, and so does parenting. Mediatwits podcast sponsor NextSpace created a place where parents could give their best quality of attention to both co-working space and childcare space under one roof. Learn more at nextspace.us/nextkids. I am indeed at the Next Space co-working space, and my son Everett is next door in Next Kids. First, I want to introduce our panel this week. We have Alex Leo joining us from Yahoo, Andrew Lee from American University, Carmel Damichis from GigaOM, Yori Ko from the Wall Street Journal, and Jefferson Yen, our producer in LA. Before we get into our discussion about Twitter, I just want to take a moment to remember and pay notice to David Carr, Media Equation columnist at the New York Times, a colleague of ours who died last week. It's really sad for a lot of us who knew him. We'll definitely miss his wit and his intelligence and just the character that he was. So about Twitter, they just recently had their earnings report. Wall Street was not happy with the earnings in that the growth in users was not as high as expected. Only 288 million users at the end of the year, but revenues were up 97%, and without one-time expenses, it was a 12 cents a share profit for Twitter, which is a little unusual for the company. Carmel, tell us what was kind of the good and the bad when it came to the earnings for Twitter this quarter.
Yeah, I think you're right that a lot of people had not been paying much attention to Twitter's revenue stream, and so the fact that they beat earnings by a pretty sizable amount for this quarter kind of caught people off guard, and actually the stock rose slightly in after-hours trading, so I think Wall Street didn't entirely react negatively. But at the same time, you're right in pointing out that the number people really care about is user growth at this point. People invested in Twitter with the hopes that it's going to become the next Facebook, and even with revenues strong, it's looking day by day like that's probably not going to be the case.
And don't you think it's a little twisted? I personally, you have an audience, an active audience of 288 million users. Most companies would kill for that kind of audience. And I mean, if they're going to bring in revenues, do they really have to be Facebook? I mean, isn't it a little bit going overboard to expect them to have billions of users?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Wall Street expert, but my sense is that a lot of times people invest in companies not just on the baseline numbers and not just on the baseline health of a company, but on the dream of a company. And Twitter, even more so than Facebook in some ways, when Facebook went public, Twitter sold that dream, especially for a lot of the people writing about it, because obviously journalists are super tapped into Twitter, and it's a huge part of our lives, our reporting process, and our careers. And so, I think that Wall Street kind of bought into that idea, and now we're almost seeing a little bit of a market correction. That's the sense that I'm getting. But in terms of Twitter's actual health, I think kind of once the stock does eventually correct, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a bad purchase for people, because it's clear that they've started to roll out some advertising and revenue schemes. They've beat on revenue for the last few quarters. It's not the first quarter that this has happened, and it seems like some things are coming down the pipeline that might make that even stronger, even if user growth continues to slow.
Yori, did you see a lot of positives in the earnings report for Twitter? I mean, do you see it kind of rebounding as a business? And also, I'm curious what you think about this deal that it made in kind of serving ads outside of Twitter?
The latest earnings was interesting because the numbers were pretty much the same as they have been. Every other quarter they've had earnings. So revenue did very well, user growth not so much. I mean, it was kind of the same story, but then this time the stock performed very well in the aftermath of the results. What was different is probably Twitter helping manage expectations a little bit better. I think, like Carmel said, like everyone was expecting Twitter to be this huge thing, this next Facebook. I think now that they're doing a better job of telling their story that they are not Facebook, that their core users are this loyal audience, but then they have these like outer circles of other audiences that they're trying to make use of, which, there is some merit to those arguments. I think now that's starting to come through to some of the analysts and investors that might have been part of the reason for the pop in the stock price afterwards. Also, their advertising business is doing very well, and I think they're really starting to see some traction there. In terms of the,
oh, go ahead.
Right. You were mentioning the deals that they recently announced with Yahoo Japan and Flipboard. These are deals that would basically allow Twitter to sell for the first time Twitter ads outside of Twitter. This is a interesting opportunity for them. I think the question is how big of an opportunity, because they will have to split the revenue with the publishers, and there is still this big question of how valuable are those people who see Twitter content outside of Twitter. Are they as valuable as the logged-in audience? Dick Costolo recently said that the logged-in user is about $4 or $4.50, and then the logged-out user is about $2. So we're starting to get a little bit of an idea there, but still a lot more to see.
Yeah, and Andrew, your take. I mean, Twitter has kind of grown to this big number, but there's still an issue, a learning curve, I guess, versus Facebook, where Facebook, you create your profile, and I mean, Twitter has kind of tried to turn itself a little bit into Facebook with more visuals and, having these big photos on your profile and trying to make it a little more Facebook-like. But there's something about it that's just a little bit harder for people, huh?
Yeah, I mean, again, we've talked a lot about Facebook as that walled garden, but one of the benefits of that is that Facebook gets to control the whole experience and determines kind of what you see and what you do. And by default, it's private, and you sign up your friends. So immediately there's kind of a there. You kind of know what you're there for, because it's your friend, it's your cousin, it's your family, it's photos, and that's kind of the heart of what Facebook is. If you look at Twitter, it's really kind of an odd cat. I mean, for journalists, we really love it, right? Because it's kind of like public first, and we get raw access to the people we want to cover, and to politicians and the sports folks. But for the average person, the number one question you have after they log into Twitter is, so what do I do now? And there's a lot of work you need to do as a newbie to get functional uses out of Twitter. So you need to find who to follow, and you need to get a client, and do I use it through the web interface or this? And there's different experiences depending on what ways you access it. Some people use it as a bookmarking service. Some people use it as a newsfeed reader. Some people use it to talk to other folks. So one of the beauties of Twitter is that it's so malleable. It's kind of like modeling clay. You can do whatever you want with it. But on the other hand, it's sometimes hard to put your finger on exactly what it is. To me, that's something that is a challenge for Twitter going forward. It's tried little things to be more multimedia like Facebook. It's tried to think about how to curate what comes at you so you're not drinking from a fire hose. But the more it tries to do that, the more it kind of goes away from its core strengths. So there's a lot of challenges for Twitter going forward.
Yeah, I mean, to go on Andrew's point, I think that there are a couple of aspects of Twitter that are going to affect their earnings going forward and going to affect their user base going forward. So we as journalists, it's like Yammer for journalists. Like if you're not on Twitter, you're not part of the conversation. You don't build up your presence in the same way. I can't tell you the number of people that I just know from Twitter, and then I see them in real life, and I'm like, oh, you're not a 50 by 50 headshot. I'm like, that's super weird. So like it's a huge networking tool, but there are many kinds of Twitter. Like my friend Francesca Ramsey, who has this huge YouTube following, and she's like, it's all about Black Twitter. It's all about Black Twitter. Like after dark, it's all about Black Twitter. I think there are a huge number of Twitter experiences out there, depending on who you are and what you use it for. The problem that Twitter has, there are twofold. So Andrew was talking about it as a bookmarking service. In the beginning, I used to use favorites as bookmarking, but as we've seen of late, like that's kind of the way I get trolls to stop talking to me, is I just like favorite the things they say to me to get them to stop talking to me. The favoriting thing is not a really clear tool, and integration of a bookmarking system might help with the fact that publishers keep complaining about the click-through rate. Publishers spend a huge amount of time on Twitter, and the return on clicks is just not as great as Facebook or even Pinterest in general, for many of the media companies I've worked for. A bookmarking service in there might be useful. The second big problem they have is online harassment and the rise of terrorists. So today Iggy Azalea quit Twitter because she's being bullied on there. There's also a huge contingent of ISIS on Twitter, and like how you attract brands and advertisers that A, might not offer you click-through rate, and B, there's a chance that you're engaging with a terrorist. It's a rough proposition.
Yeah, and that's true, and it's always a hard balance because they want to add users, and yet do they want all their users to be terrorists or harassers? And so that's the balancing act when you want to open your platform to everyone. Carmel, what do you think about the whole thing for publishers and for media people? We love to be able to promote our things, and you have to really hit people over the head on Twitter multiple times, and Facebook too, to really get people to click through and actually read it. It's a lot easier to just favorite something or retweet it or respond and say great story, but actually going through and reading it seems like less and less people are doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that less and less people are probably doing that on a lot of social media platforms. I don't think it's just Twitter that's happening. Obviously, on Facebook, you have the rise of stories that would get more click-throughs, like the cat videos and the listicles, but we almost need to distinguish between that kind of story, I think, and what we're talking about, which is media journalism reported stories. And I feel like even when the click-through rate isn't that high, and it's easy for me to say this because I'm not my editor who has to keep the lights on and the paychecks running, I still feel like there's a reason that companies put a lot of effort into their Twitter strategy, and it's because it's a large part of what builds the brand. And when you do have a great story, it's what gets the word out in a more democratic way, because people just aren't going to homepages anymore. And, we all kind of know this. There's definitely still a contingent that it's on the way down, and there's so much information out there that people are relying on their friends to sort through it. And so even if the click-through rate's not that high, I don't feel like leaving Twitter is the answer, because it's what gets other journalists reading your story, which is important for, your own, brand and integrity. I hate to use the word, my personal brand. And then in terms of, with readers, I think those initial tweets are eventually what trickle down to readers. Maybe they're not getting a lot of click-through on Twitter, but, someone maybe shares it or goes and posts it on Facebook, and then people on Facebook start to get it. Pinterest is its own story. So I don't necessarily think that we should abandon Twitter yet.
I don't advocate abandoning Twitter, and I love Twitter. Let me just be very clear. I spend most of my life on Twitter.
So it better be worth it.
Yeah, so it better be worth it. I'm not sitting there tweeting links all day. And I think to your point about the brand is the thing that Twitter offers you is a reach of influencers. You have all of the editor-in-chiefs of every major publication on there. Except the New York Times, as we know, they have a Twitter problem. But otherwise, you can reach highly influential people from other media organizations without pitching them directly. So it's great for that. When it comes to mass click-through rate, the return on seriously reported journalism stories on Facebook is very high. In fact, Facebook users love long-form stories. So I think there's a misconception about what Facebook is good for. It's good for all journalism, really. Twitter is about reaching the people that can then filter it down to everyone else, for me.
Yeah. And we're listening to the Mediatwits. I'm Mark Glazer, executive editor at PBS Media Shift. We have guests Alex Leo at Yahoo, Andrew Lee, American University, Carmel D'Amicis at GigaOM, Yori Ko at Wall Street Journal. Yori, what do you think about this argument about what publishers really are going to get out of Twitter if they're not getting as much traffic as they used to? is this something, I mean, For the Win, which is a blog that USA Today owns, they don't even have Twitter share buttons anymore. They just have like a text message share. I mean, is that where we're going? I mean, is the whole idea of trying to drive traffic through social media changing right now?
No, I mean, Twitter's not going away, definitely not for journalists. And you're talking specifically about publishers and not reporters?
Right.
I mean, I think the reality is that Twitter is becoming a main communication medium for a lot of news organizations, and for anyone to abandon it is just silly. Even if it doesn't drive click-through rate, I think like what the others were saying about the branding, getting the word out there, it is just invaluable. I think it's very hard to quantify the value of Twitter because, yes, it doesn't drive a lot of traffic. In fact, I think it's like ridiculous and kind of silly when you see someone, you know, posting a breaking news story, then everyone posting that same story like seconds later. There is no way they all went to that story and read it first before sharing that link. People are just sharing and posting links like just because they like the tweet or the headline that goes with it. You know, I think Twitter is not a place to consume news. It's where news is shared and talked about. I think in a way the feed moves too fast. For me, at least, like, you know, when I see interesting stories, I like sometimes I'll click through and I'll start reading the first couple graphs and then I'll leave the tab open and go right back to Twitter. The times I actually do go through and read the whole story is probably on Facebook because it's much slower and I really just, you know, the story pops up in between like the 10th photo of a kitten and like a baby, so I need a break.
Right. Well, what about this idea where there's embedded, you know, now you can embed audio into tweets, you can embed video into tweets, and so if the publishers can basically embed the sponsorship or the ads into their video or audio content, that's one way that I guess if people are going to consume and look at the video on Twitter, at least they'll see the ads that way. I mean, we do it with our podcast when you consume it on social media.
Do you mean run the ad within the Twitter card first, of the publisher's ad?
Well, the ad's basically baked into the video or audio. So when you embed audio into Twitter and people listen to it, they're going to hear your ad. I mean, that's one way, and that's kind of the Snapchat idea, where you know your ad is basically in the actual social feed.
There's two things here. There's Twitter cards, which allow you to just, you know, have a YouTube player in there. It may have your video. You can have your own player in there. It can have your ad attached to it. And then there's the feature that Twitter launched just this week, which is their own video player separate than Vine, in which you can upload video there. And that will run off of a rev share deal with Twitter. So those are two different business models.
Which do you think has the most possibility for publishers being there?
I mean, I think both have merit. Twitter has launched their video along with a rev share model, whereas Facebook does not have that yet. And that's definitely something I think a lot of publishers would be interested in. Video is an incredibly expensive proposition for news organizations, so to put it somewhere without their player and without their ads and without the possibility of making money is a rough proposition. So.
Andrew, you had a thought also about kind of what both reporters and publishers get out of being on Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, what Carmel said was valid in that, you know, a lot of these folks are just not going to click through. So even if people don't click through, I think it is important for news organizations or any publisher to have their own vanity URL shortener. So don't just use bit.ly. If you notice that a lot of the folks like the Atlantic or Washington Post uses wapo.st as its prefix for its URLs that are shortened, at least you can still get the branding of your news organization in there when people read those headlines. I'm probably the bane of a lot of these organizations in that I rarely use just the raw headlines. I'll try to rewrite it to include more information. So even if you don't click through, you kind of get the gist of what's going on. So it's not just 9 things you won't believe happened to Pound Cake this year. Instead, I'm giving you the answer in the tweet. And that's I'm part of the problem in that sense. But that's the advice I give to journalists, is that if you're trying to build your brand and trying to create your niche as the informer on a certain beat, then that's something that you should do. So, for example, for Wikipedia-oriented stuff, I'm followed by tons of folks on just a Wikipedia beat, because that's something I read every day, and I'm kind of viewed as the summarizer of all things Wikipedia, because I rewrite those headlines all the time. So.
But what happened to Pound Cake this year, Andrew?
Well, now you left us hanging, Andrew. I know. Carmel, do you agree? I mean, how do you usually use Twitter? Is it about promotion? Is it about connecting? Is it finding sources too, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I've had a love-hate relationship with Twitter, which I feel like a lot of journalists can identify with, and so it's been different in different phases of my life, which I think is fitting to the whole clay tofu argument. So in this phase of my life, I'm actually really active on it, and I would credit it in large part with, the fact that I do feel like I'm starting to get my name out there more. I'm starting to engage more in conversations with investors, occasionally with founders, and I just kind of end up having like this running list of names of people I've interacted with that maybe haven't met in person, and it makes meeting them in person when you run into them at conferences or they're speaking so much easier. There's already a connection. So I guess I would say I mostly use it for networking. I do not tweet all of my stories. I do not try to really get traffic through that way. I will tweet the ones that I've spent a lot of time on, and I'll tweet them a couple times, not thinking I'm going to get much traffic out of those individual tweets, but, in the hopes that the right people will see it. Just like I think Alex was saying, sort of like you're trying to reach the influencers. You're not necessarily going for traffic. So I think there's almost like two issues we're talking about, which someone mentioned earlier. There's like maybe Yuri, the publisher issue and like the journalist issue. And the two are going to use them in totally different ways and should have different strategies. And I think the real untold story is how few publishers are focusing on Pinterest when they should be. They put tons of energy into Twitter, and Pinterest, I think, is the number 2 driver of traffic for a lot of organizations.
Preach it. Let's do our next podcast on that.
I'm a Pinterest fan, so a little biased.
Yeah, we did have a show about Pinterest talking about
yeah.
that, but it's true. It's funny how few publishers do pay attention there, and it's visual, too. I mean, that's the other thing, and Twitter is trying to do that. You look at their numbers when it comes to posts that are tweets that have photos on them, they get a lot more engagement, and same with video. Vine, they own Vine, and so that helps them get a lot of engagement. Yuri, what do you think about that? I mean, should all of us be using more visuals when we use Twitter, or is it just let's just stick to networking, like what Carmel said?
You mean like including images and stuff with our tweets?
Yeah.
Well, I've been told by our own social media folks that yes, we should always be using images in order to boost engagement. I was schooled, actually. I guess the stats don't lie. When you attach a pretty picture or a graphic with your tweet, people like that and will click on it or click on your link, maybe. But at least expand the tweet to see what other information you're including in the tweet. So I think visual is very good. I think, Twitter adding more of those kinds of tools is smart. I think it'll be very interesting to see how users and as well as reporters and publishers start to use the native video feature. I think that could help make a lot of sense on how to make Twitter more usable, I suppose.
Yeah, because Facebook has gotten a lot out of the video that they have now. I mean, you go through your feed and you just see videos popping up and playing, and it's kind of hard to avoid them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not all welcome, right?
But they can stay on mute, and their growth in like a 2 or 3 month period this year between like May and July was 50% growth in video streams. They're not joking around about a video at Facebook. I think
and it's smart to have it on mute, but still, it's like you see it. It's very hard to avoid, right?
That's what we want, Mark. We want your eyeballs.
But in a way, that's also why I like Instagram, because I actually like Instagram more now because Facebook has gotten so just busy. I like the stillness and the pretty pictures on Instagram. It like calms me down, and then I go back to Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
I remember I actually when I first started at Gigom about half a year ago, it was my first time really covering Facebook because my prior tech reporting job I was on the startup beat, and I remember my first big story was like, we need to write about how, Facebook has just gone away from its original premise of, friends and family and keeping up with like all the people that you know and you've met, because all I ever get are news articles in my feed, and I just miss, keeping up these relationships, and like, how is Facebook going to survive? It's doing the wrong thing. And then like I did 2 seconds of research, and eventually I think that same week was Facebook's earnings call where they just blew everything away, and I quickly realized / read that the switch to posting a bunch of news articles keeps people on the site way more than, kitten and baby and anniversary videos. And so I went, oh, damn, the Facebook I love is gone, but I guess it's the best way for the company to stick around.
No question. I want to thank our panel this week, Alex Leo from Yahoo, Andrew Lee from American University, Carmel De Amicis at GigaOM, Yori Ko at Wall Street Journal, and Jefferson Yen, our producer. I want to thank our sponsor, NextSpace, NextKids, providing childcare and co-working under one roof. You can learn more about them at nextspace.us/nextkids. You can catch us each and every week on the Mediatwits at PBS Media Shift at pbs.org/mediashift. Have a great week, everyone.